Yeah, of course. Well, welcome to I think this is the third now, Catherine.
Yeah.
Welcome to the third session. Thanks for turning up. Usual, as Catherine's just said, usual format. Feel free to stick your hand up digitally or ask questions in the chat. When Catherine starts presenting, I will go off screen and not surprise her like I did last month, who thought I'd gone offline. But great to see everyone. These have been great sessions. Why am I here? Because we support the Advice for Advisors podcast through Octo, and we host a lot of Catherine's content and CPD on Octo as well. So we're very, very pleased to be part of this. So welcome everyone, and look forward to a great session, Catherine.
Fantastic, thank you, Ian. Obviously, yes, it's these magic that makes this all CPDable. So big thank you to Lee at the start as well. So we're going to be talking about women's health and protection. So as was mentioned on the online system as well, there are multiple genders, and you know it's unfortunate in a sense to be speaking in some ways as a male and female, but ultimately that is what we're going to be doing. And it's important as well that if you are somebody who is speaking to somebody and they in the protection space and they don't identify as male or female, that you obviously handle that conversation really sensitively. But as is for the purpose of this, the difficulty we have is that in protection insurance, we have to, at the moment, with insurer systems, we have to put people in as male or female. So I'm going to be speaking to this very much as in like a female woman, so like that kind of like traditional terminology, just because that is what the insurance dictates that we do. And hopefully that'll all be useful, the stuff that we're talking about as well. I'm just going to let somebody else in. So general things to kind of start us off before we go into the really, really nitty gritty stuff. Premiums, we used to have it where premiums used to be different for male and females. Men were much more expensive for life insurance. Females were much more expensive for income protection because of the fact that they statistically showed the higher claim levels. We all had, obviously, the gender directive came in many years ago, which meant that insurers couldn't price people differently based upon their gender. And so what that basically meant is instead of obviously people thinking, wonderful, the premiums will come down, obviously it didn't. So whereas women used to be cheaper for life insurance, they pretty much came up to where the men were, and men maybe dropped a little bit in terms of pricing. Same for income protection. Women's premiums kept pretty much where they were, men's just shot up. So that's what's happened. But what's really interesting is that this is relevant in the personal and business protection space. So if you do group insurance at all, so group life insurance, group critical illness cover, group income protection, it is still gender priced. I don't know how, I don't know why, but there's slightly different rules, well, not slightly, very different rules when it comes to the group sort of like side of things, the technicalities, and they weren't upheld to that gender directive that was brought in. So when you are doing quotations, and you maybe, I sometimes get it with companies where, you know, naturally when you're doing a group sort of quotation, a lot of firms are quite small. They don't really know too much about the group side of things. They're a little bit kind of like, well, what is it? Do I really need it? Ultimately, what's the price? And they might not want to give you all the employee data straight away. And with that side of things, you know, we are talking, you know, some kind, usually a name, a date of birth, the gender, salary, things like that. So sometimes, and I've had this before, where firms have said to me, look, we've got 20 people, it's pretty much half women, half men, and they're between, I don't know, 24 and 42. And sometimes you do just kind of have to make up in some ways the data to just go, look, and basically be saying, I can't say this is accurate because you've not given me the actual data, but I've done like what I think is roughly right. So don't make that mistake of thinking, oh, I'll just put everyone down as male because, you know, it's the same for everybody. You know, we do need to make sure in that space that we are making sure that the gender is in there. So some of the things that we can see is a little bit of an issue, when we're looking at women's protection is that it's not necessarily this is being done because it's women's protection. It kind of sits behind the statistics and everything, and in terms of the claims data and things that we've seen in the past, but women do tend to have more exclusions than men when it comes to income protection and critical illness cover. So life insurance, it would be rare to have exclusions. We don't usually expect that. For anybody who's been very technical with me, a lot of insurers do put an initial 12-month suicide exclusion on life insurance policies, regardless of that person's medical history. It's just a standard clause that comes with a lot of insurers. But bar that in life insurance, we wouldn't be expecting exclusions. We'd be more expecting premium increases. That's not to say it doesn't happen, But with most of your mainstream providers, you're not going to see that. The insurer's just going to go, we either can't cover or it's a premium increase. But critical illness, income protection, the insurers go, well, actually a bit more leeway. So we're not just going to say, no, we're not going to cover, but it might be a premium increase, it might be an exclusion. But if we look at, say, income protection, that's a really interesting one, because in terms of women's health, women, being a bit stereotypical here, so do forgive me, I'm not saying this is blanket information and definitely for everybody, but women do tend to talk about their health more. They do tend to go out and seek support from counsellors, talking therapies, GPs, things like that. And that can automatically start to lead towards mental health exclusions, depending upon the timeframes and depending upon the situation, because mental health, the biggest claim area when it comes to income protection. So if somebody already has that, then it is something that the insurers are generally going to want to exclude unless a good period of time has passed. I'd say sometimes if it's a little bit around bereavement and somebody's maybe had to have some time off work due to bereavement, they won't necessarily take that into account. They won't necessarily put on exclusions, but quite a lot of the time it is quite almost feels a bit gung-ho in terms of putting a mental health exclusion on there. And it is, I say, usually women that would tend to reach out and get support in that area. And again, we do see that from the statistics in terms of a lot of data and information that's coming out in terms of men's health, and obviously that lack of ability to feel able to engage at times and getting that support. But ultimately, as with many things, as soon as we reach out and get support, then we're automatically kind of labelled, and it can be an issue when we're going for the insurances. It's kind of that thing as well of like some people are blissfully unaware, walking around, not knowing they've got high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, blood pressure, and they wouldn't have any issue getting insurance because they're just not aware, they're not engaged with anybody. And there's no symptoms in a sense that have made them think, oh, I need to go and do that and check this. Whereas someone else who's kind of like been really on top of the health may be going to, I don't know, annual health MOTs that you get with insurances. I do, I get an annual. And so that would be seen very early. And we're automatically starting to get a little bit of like, oh, actually, because I've been doing so well for my health, that's actually going to cause me an issue in terms of getting the insurance sometimes. So it's a little bit, it's a tricky one. The other thing to bear in mind as well with this, and it's a little bit of a side tangent here away from the women's health, but just be very mindful as well that when we are as an industry, and I do think, this is my opinion, I do appreciate this is a webinar, and obviously sometimes opinions are going to come into it, is that we need to be careful about value-added benefits as well, because the very nature of value-added benefits that insurers are promoting these, we offer mental health support with our insurances, engage, do this, do that, automatically that is when we're coming into chatting to people about wanting to get things like income protection in the future potentially, well, they've engaged with mental health support. And at the moment, the insurers' systems aren't necessarily sophisticated enough. I say sophisticated enough, in all fairness, I don't even think it's a computer thing. I literally don't know how they would be able to manage this, but how do they know that somebody's reached out to the value-added benefits for just general talking therapy versus actually somebody who really has a mental health condition is needed to reach out? So we do have quite a difficulty there. It is something that's been discussed quite a bit in the industry, because we're almost, with some extras, almost lining people up to then have difficulty in getting the insurance. So it's just something to be very mindful of. But also as well, we do have that women tend to be declined more for income protection because, and again, going a bit stereotypical here, but let's say a woman has children, she's quite likely to, at some point while the child is quite young, to experience some back pain, and I'm not saying that the fellows wouldn't either, but she's chasing around quite a lot, this little hyperactive bundle of energy. She's probably bent over quite a bit, helping them learn to walk, generally carrying them quite a lot. And I'm not saying that this is to say just purely women, but women do tend to take more the maternity leave side of things. So they tend to have more time doing that than, say, the fellas do. She's probably at some point as well felt a bit anxious. That's not to say that someone's got a full anxiety condition, but you're anxious with that little bundle, especially if it's your first one. I know I've got 3. And with the first one, obviously, everything's absolutely terrifying because you're suddenly responsible for this little thing and you don't know what you're doing. And, it's quite intense. But obviously, fellas can definitely experience that too. But straight away, we've got probably a bit of anxiety, a bit of back pain. Just need one more thing, and the majority of mainstream insurers will say that they're not able to offer income protection. So we just want to be really, really mindful that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in the industry still, but again, because of the fact that back pain as well, it's next to mental health, it's the most claimed on condition. That's the reason that insurers obviously are very cautious about offering that. But we just want to be mindful when we're speaking to people. We want to be encouraging people to have these policies, but it's quite difficult at times if you're saying, oh, I really want you to have this, you need it because of X, Y, Z. And this person's, a lot of people haven't really heard of income protection. They don't really know what it's about, what the worth of it is. You're trying to encourage them, and then all of a sudden we've got these exclusions there. It can be quite a negative thing. Because also, especially on the mental health side of things, if it's just been like a bit of mild anxiety in a sense, it can feel like a real kick in the teeth. So just be mindful of that. When it comes to critical illness cover, I'm just going to talk about critical illness cover now, and then we're going to go into more like the chatting about the underwriting disclosures for more female specific conditions. Again, not saying that they're not there for men, but just what we would generally more see in the female population. But critical illness cover, we're quite likely to get breast cancer exclusions if a close family member has had breast cancer at a certain age and this person's a certain age. We could have ovarian cancer exclusions. And what's interesting about that, really interesting, is that I was speaking to an insurer, and I'd gone to get some critical illness cover for a fella, and there was a family member with prostate cancer, and they got an exclusion on their critical illness cover. They were being told they were going to have an exclusion on the critical illness cover because of the prostate cancer. And I went to the insurer, I said, hang on a minute, in a sense, why? Because nobody else is doing that. And I just wanted to understand the background to it. And the feedback that came back, and it in terms of equality, it made lots and lots of sense. And they said, well, actually, when we talk about breast cancer and things like that, we often talk about certain genetics and something known as the BRCA gene. It makes it potentially more likely, not always a certainty, but more likely. And there's certain genetic links as well to prostate cancer that can't be ruled out. Now, the majority of insurers don't pay attention to this, but one of the insurers did. And that ended up being in a really strange kind of mindset for me when I was looking at it, because I was like, well, hang on a minute. I kind of like and respect that there's that exclusion there, because if women are getting the exclusion, then I feel like, well, if men also have a similar risk, then there should, it should be equal. But then at the same point, I was like, but I don't want, obviously, that exclusion for my client. I really don't want that there. And I certainly don't want to advocate that the industry changes and we suddenly start getting prostate cancer exclusions everywhere. But it does show that there is a difference, because there is genetic markers for certain cancers with men and women, and ultimately, the majority of insurers choose to ignore one of those genetic markers on the prostate cancer for men. So we are seeing things that aren't the same and being treated differently when there is a female client. Now, something else that's really interesting, there's a really good example of this, is if we apply for income protection. And I'm going to look at a sheet because I want to make sure that I've got this right before I start saying it specifically. But sometimes with income protection, we might get a multiple sclerosis exclusion if we're a woman and there's been someone in our family who have it. So very specifically check this, which is why I'm just going to quickly look at my sheet to the side and make sure I get this right for you. So if you have a female applicant for some income protection policies and their mum had multiple sclerosis, they will exclude multiple sclerosis claims from the income protection policy. But if you have a male applicant and the mum had multiple sclerosis, the male will be given the choice of an exclusion or a premium increase. And that's really, obviously, really interesting. Again, it will come down to statistics, it'll come down to data as to what's been seen over time. But it is something where we are going to be seeing something different. So whilst we're maybe not able to make changes straight away, and I certainly don't know all the statistics behind it and just how different that is in terms of those claims and the claim risks, it's something where if we have done the research, we need to be mindful and go, well, actually, no, if somebody's got MS, as the mum, that means it's an exclusion straight out. Well, no, actually, we need to kind of have like a bit of like an inequality kind of document to the side somewhere where we can go kind of like, well, actually, that's only the case if it's a female. If it's a male client I've got and the mum had MS, we're potentially fine, and we can have a couple of options. So just really keep that in mind as well, that we're always looking for options that will obviously make things better, but we do need to be mindful that what we always search for in terms of male and female, it isn't necessarily going to be equal when we're going for those underwriting risks. So in terms of disclosures, just to try and give everybody a little bit of insight into some of the main areas. So we do have, as I mentioned before, the BRCA gene. It's actually spelled BRCA, and I think there's a few versions of it. And that's the one, I think it was quite famously, Angelina Jolie was told that she had it. She had a double mastectomy because of it, and her mum had breast cancer. And it became quite well known. Obviously, it was well known before that, but really well known when that happened a few years ago as well. And it's basically a genetic marker that says that you are more likely to develop breast cancer. It's not a certainty, but you are more likely. And this can be really tricky when we're looking at things. So let's say we're looking at life insurance. I'm sure many of us are aware when you do an application, they're only going to ask about genetic tests if you apply for over £500,000 and if it was related to Huntington's disease. And I believe it's over £300,000 for critical illness cover and Huntington's disease, but it might be a little bit lower now. Not sure off the top of my head. But it's definitely lower than the life insurance side when we're looking at applying for things. Now, so what that means is if your client does have a positive genetic test for the BRCA gene, we don't need to say it to the insurer, regardless of the sum assured, even though there is that higher risk. Now, you might be thinking, well, how does that work? Well, the reason that kind of works is, in terms of the family history, breast cancer is very likely to come up in the family history, especially if it was a parent, which means that we're possibly going to be getting the breast cancer exclusion. So they're going to be absorbing. So even though we're not telling them about the genetic test, they're going to assume in some ways that if someone has a close family member that's had breast cancer, they're probably going to assume, well, there's a high chance that this person has the BRCA gene. So there we go. And they'll just treat it as such, obviously bearing on the side of caution. I can't say that all insurers will be doing that. But, I think that's kind of like the way that they do it. There is that assumption. So it's a bit like as well, if somebody has a family history of Huntington's, we wouldn't need to tell them about genetic testing under a certain amount, but Huntington's disease would come up in the family history. So they're going to work on the side of caution to think, well, actually, there's a 50-50 chance that this person does have the Huntington's gene. What can become quite confusing is knowing what to do in terms of, is it a genetic test? Is it a diagnostic test? Genetic tests are very different to diagnostic tests. So when you're speaking to a client and they are saying anything about the BRCA gene, it's just really important just to make sure that you just clarify with them and say, right, so can I just double check? This was purely a genetic test. You've not had any symptoms. There wasn't a concern that you'd actually developed breast cancer. It was just purely to see if you have that link based upon family history. Because what we don't want to do, and some people do get confused, we don't want somebody to have gone for diagnostic tests, think it was genetic tests, and then end up in a non-disclosure situation, because obviously that wouldn't be beneficial for anybody at all. So really key thing when it comes to genetic testing, for any genetic testing, was it because they were symptomatic, or was it due to sort of like just the genetic aspects of it for the family? Often find this as well in terms of bowel cancer. Quite a lot of people do get the option to have certain genetic tests linked to bowel cancer, something often known as Lynch syndrome. They might be offered that. So again, when you're looking at the insurers' systems and the questions, some insurers will say, like family history, who's had all of it? Has any of your family had this? And then they'll sometimes say, or any other inherited condition that you've been suggested to have genetic testing for. So just keep an eye out for that, because that would include if somebody's even engaged with some counselling to see if they wanted the genetic test and not have it, things like that. And we just want to make sure that we know what's happening in terms of the diagnostics and things. Okay. So next one's breast cancer. So obviously, typically a female condition, but we are going to be saying that obviously men can get breast cancer. So with the breast cancer, the key things, really, really key things you want to know are the staging and the grading of the breast cancer. Potentially, the client might know it as the TNM score, so that's Tango November Mike score. Now, with the staging, that's how big the tumour was. So it might be to say, oh, well, it was 1.5 centimetres or 2 centimetres. So that we know how big it is then. The grading is to do with what the cells were doing. So that's all about that. The higher the grade, the more, I'm going to think, fun and crazy the cells are going. I know it's not fun and crazy, so forgive that kind of wording on it, but the more they've had a bit of a party in there and gone different shapes, different sizes, different color, everything going on them. So we want it to be ideally the lowest staging, the lowest grading when we're going to be applying for cover. Really important as well to double check if they've had anything like chemotherapy, radiotherapy. It's a really good indication for you and the underwriters as to how strong the cancer was. And chemotherapy is the stronger one. So you do know that if they've had chemotherapy, then it's really needed some quite intense treatment to it. You will find, though, that obviously we all kind of like hear this as well. So like say, if you're having any ongoing cancer treatments, that, you know, you're probably not ready to get insurance until that's stopped. That's true and it's not true. So ongoing cancer, ongoing radiotherapy, very, very unlikely we're going to get any insurance. We can do insurance, but it's going to have pre-existing condition exclusion, which is a bit too intense considering if someone is going through cancer treatment. But there is something known as tamoxifen, and that is an ongoing cancer treatment that people are given once they've finished sort of like chemotherapy, radiotherapy, any surgery, things like that. And tamoxifen is seen as kind of like a bit like a maintenance kind of drug. So if somebody is taking tamoxifen, you can actually have quite a lot of options with the insurers, provided how strong the cancer was in the first place. So key thing, staging, grading, tamoxifen should be okay. We just want to keep an eye on that side. Another one, abnormal smears. So abnormal smear tests are something that women do experience. Quite a lot of women experience them. Everything in a sense down there just have its moments at times. And it could be that someone's been told they've got abnormal cells. It could be referred to as SIN1 or SIN2, and that's actually Charlie Indigo November. It could be that they're told they've got HPV. Now, you might be aware of HPV. It's something that pretty much I think all children get vaccinated against now when they're in their teens, and it's to try and prevent things like, because the HPV can lead to cancers in that area. But again, this is something where we're going to have a little bit of a trickiness compared to women to men, because again, it's a blissfully unaware kind of thing. So women are obviously given the option to have routine smear tests where things like this can be found, obviously ideally treated. Sometimes it is that there's like a little bit of, there's lots of technical terms, but sometimes there will, I won't go into the too many technical terms because I can imagine people wincing a little bit if I explain the treatment, but sometimes there'll be a little biopsy. Sometimes there'll be certain treatment that kind of buzzes and saps the cells that shouldn't be kind of being a bit different. The cells aren't necessarily going to become cancer, but it's the fact that they can do, depending upon what happens going forward. So lots and lots going on. Sometimes it's just, well, let's just wait and see what the next smear's like. Now, a lot of insurers don't like the let's wait and see what happens. They will want to see a clear normal smear test. Not all of them do, some of them do. So just be really mindful, be on top of who you are researching, what you're seeing, and just be on top of that. Now, the blissfully unaware thing is that actually, say like the HPV thing, which is the one that is the really key concern here. Lots of men have HPV, but they are blissfully unaware because obviously women get the regular smear tests, but men don't get checked for HPV. So that's another area where it's kind of, again, women are kind of getting the bad side of it. I mean, obviously we get the good side of it in the sense of we get these tests, we can catch things early on, and fellas obviously unfortunately don't get those tests and maybe catch things early on, so they've got the bad side of that. But then in the insurance world, women are kind of being sort of given a different treatment to men because of the fact that assuming that they are being doing those tests and doing that regular engagement with the GP and the nurses to make sure that everything is working how we would want it to be working. So key thing with smear tests, have they had a follow-up? Is it clear? The majority of insurers will want that. Menopause. Menopause in itself shouldn't have an influence on any of the insurances. And I'll say, sorry, the smear test. So when I say about it affecting it, the majority of insurers will not offer insurance unless there has been a normal smear afterwards. I say some can, but the majority won't. But with menopause, majority of insurers, if it's menopause in itself, should be absolutely fine. They don't ask about HRT treatment or anything like that. But some women choose not to have HRT treatment. Some choose to just not have any treatment. Some choose to have HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, and it's to try and in a sense that delays menopause. It doesn't actually stop this. It does stop the symptoms, but it's not solving the issue. It's just delaying it. Or some people decide to do anxiety medication because that can help with the sleep. It can help with menopause. Does make you a bit more alert, a bit more anxious. And what we can find is that people who are in that situation, if they're taking the anxiety medication, potentially with incompetence could have a mental health exclusion. Now, there is debate as to whether or not, well, if they're feeling anxious because of the menopause, then that's mental health. And but it's also, in some ways, it's not mental health, because it's just the fact that it's something that's symptomatic. All women are going to go through it at some point, you know, so are we doing this to everybody? You might think, well, what about at the time that they're going to be taking out IP, when this, you know, at what age are they going to be? Well, menopause can kick in from as early as the 30s. It's unusual, but it can do. There are certain medical conditions that can cause it to kick in earlier as well. I'll chat about them a little bit. If I have time, I'm very, very conscious of time. I'm such a talker. So we just need to be on top of that. So if you've got somebody, you want to do income protection for them, and they've got menopause, they're taking anxiety medication, don't go through the usual computer routes from the start. You know, speak to an underwriter, explain the situation, get your indication. I've actually specifically spoken to quite a lot of insurers about this in terms of their underwriters, and they've said, actually, the guidance is that, you know, if it's anxiety medication related to the menopause, it shouldn't be an issue. There shouldn't be an exclusion there. You know, we wouldn't want to be doing that. But the online systems, you know, would be automatically doing that. So you would still submit online, but then you get into the underwriters and say, remember, we had this conversation and you gave me this reference. Well, this app is related to it. Can you please just go in and sort it out? And so with the menopause, key thing is what treatments are they taking? As I say, HRT won't even come up. We then have things like IVF treatments. And again, needing IVF treatments doesn't actually have in itself any connotation for the insurances. You know, the insurers specifically stay on there, we don't need to know about IVF treatments. Now, we say that, the thing is that if there's an underlying medical reason, so sometimes there is no medical reason whatsoever. Sometimes it is due to the relationship. So, you know, you could have two females that are in a relationship, two males that are in a relationship, there could be surrogates involved. So there could be many, many situations, and we wouldn't need to be detailing that. But the key thing with the IVF side of things is whether or not it is a medical condition. So as an example, we have endometriosis. So endometriosis is typically thought of as a female condition because it does tend to be in the female organs. However, endometriosis cells have been found at times to be in the lungs or the brain, and they have also been found to be in men as well. So something with that one, we're going to want to know, is there any treatment? Is there any outstanding surgery? Is it causing time off work? Things like that. It can be a very, very uncomfortable, painful condition. So we just want to know how much it's affecting them. You know, again, surgery, we would want them to be at a point where they've fully recovered from surgery, things like that. And also, have the cells kind of traveled anywhere else? That's a really important thing. And for something like that, if that was causing the need for the IVF treatment, you know, it's again, the IVF treatment in itself wouldn't even come up, but we would know that there was the endometriosis there. And if they might turn around and say, have you got any outstanding tests and investigations? And you might turn and say, well, look, for the interest of transparency, there is actually going to be some IVF treatment. The insurer will just discount the IVF treatment. It won't come into their deciding factors side of things. We then have another one that's similar-ish, is, I just realised I've got quite a bit more to go through actually, so I better speed up, is polycystic ovary syndrome. So that is another condition that can really affect fertility. It might be a reason that somebody will be going through IVF. So again, any outstanding investigations, really key things with a polycystic ovary syndrome just to be aware of is, one is the medication. So people with PCOS, which is shortened to, will sometimes be given metformin. Now, metformin is quite a common medication for type 2 diabetes. It's not necessarily, so far, obviously medical things change, so far it's not necessarily the go-to treatment for PCOS. So the insurer just generally want to know if metformin is in use. The other thing as well for people with PCOS is just be mindful because often their BMI is higher. So you might be needing to look at specific insurers in terms of those BMI tables. Now, in terms of other things that we can quickly go through, and just in case anybody has any questions, we can go through there. So pregnancy and income protection. People can have income protection when they're pregnant. We can potentially take it out. People often will say, what's the point? But there's reasons why we might want to or not. We do find that with pregnancy that women tend to be the ones to take the maternity leave. There is obviously shared parental leave now, but usually it is the woman that would take the parental leave. Now, when it comes to income protection, if they've got an existing policy, there's different things that can happen. Some insurers will just say, It's absolutely fine. You know, the policy just stays as it is, and we will honour a claim, which is obviously wonderful. And it might be something that you want to consider when you're choosing an insurer. If you do have somebody, obviously we're not going to say to our clients, hey, are you planning on getting pregnant in the next few years or anything, depending upon their age? But it might be that if they are somebody who is at an age where they might, you know, potentially feasibly in our mind be pregnant at some point, we might want to choose an insurer who is able to say, well, actually, we'd still cover claims if they were on maternity leave. We have some insurers that will change the definition away from own occupation to house persons cover during the maternity leave. And then we've got some insurers who will say, well, we're not going to pay out anything when they're on maternity leave because they're not working. Which obviously I feel lots of women who've maybe had children, same as me, would feel sort of like, how very dare you, you know, kind of thing on that. You know, it's definitely a job, at least one job, to be having a little one. But if you've got more than one, it's intense. I say I've got 3 children and they outnumber us now, which is just interesting. So we want to really keep an eye on that. I believe that LV has really, really good options when it comes to pregnancy and IP and maternity leave. So I do suggest having a look at that one. As with anything, if they're not the cheapest provider by a considerable amount, and even if they aren't the cheapest by even a little amount, you should really make your client aware, you know, sort of like, well, this one's available at this price. I do think the LV one's better because of this. You might not want to go into like because of pregnancy, unless they've said that they're planning on starting a family. That could be a real selling point for it. But obviously, there's quite a lot of people who don't want kids. Or the other thing you have to bear in mind is that some people can't have children. And you might not know about that based upon the questions that we're going to be going through for the protection insurance thing. So we also want to be mindful that we're not going to upset anyone by saying anything that's quite triggering. So do that as well. So a couple of last things. Divorce. Lots of people are getting divorced, and not always, but, you know, we can find that, you know, there's times where insurance has been mainly done for a male partner. And again, obviously, I'm not saying it's just male and female partners. There's obviously different situations, different families, but it might be, let's say the breadwinner, there was lots of insurances done for the breadwinner, and there's a divorce, and the person who wasn't the breadwinner is actually coming out of that and not sure as to what to do. They're having to start from scratch, and you're going to be there to help them. So there's a few things that we can try and do. So the first one is to do separation clauses if possible in the insurance. So we don't have to restart again. Obviously, they're older now. There might be health conditions now. So wherever possible, let's try and get a separation clause. So the insurer splits the joint policy into 2 single ones. It might be that we need to update the trusts. Some insurers, which I'm sure we all know, have wonderful online trust systems that allow us to update them easily. And some of them are absolutely awful, require wet signatures and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of it, and as well, depending upon the relationship dynamic and how it was happening, you might not get the partner willing to sign the trust to update it and to sort of like make those changes. And obviously it's usually all trustees as well, obviously, that would need to make the changes. So it can be quite difficult. So we might just decide, you know what, stuff this, let's just start new. But an interesting thing, and it's something that we've been involved in a few times, where people have come to us and said, right, I'm getting divorced. Part of the divorce agreement is that I have to put in insurance in place so that if I die, my ex-partner has this much money for the kids, because obviously the child support will end. So in terms of recommendations, if you do have a client that's going through a divorce and they're in that process, it might be worth saying to them, look, just wondering, does your partner have anything like, you know, a family income benefit policy, so that if something happens to them, that, you know, that basically you're going to still get that childcare, you know, that amount that you need, the child support that you need. Not many people are aware of it, and it could be something that they do bring into that divorce discussion. And ultimately, for you and your client, that is, well, for your client, that is going to be obviously a very, very positive outcome for them if they're able to get something like that arranged. Possibly do it on like a life of another basis, where they will pay for it and your client will pay for it, and obviously it'd be the other person. But it would all need to be done, obviously, with permission of the other person as well, or potentially through the enforcement of the divorce proceedings. And then the last thing, so we just have about 10 minutes, or a little bit less than 10 minutes or so, for any questions or any thoughts, or Lee can ask me something, is the thing of safeguarding. Now, I'm going to be saying that, you know, statistically, women are the ones that are far more likely to experience economic abuse than males. That is not to say that men don't. Certainly not. But in terms of statistics, this is why we're bringing it in here. It is much more likely. And actually now economic abuse does sit within domestic abuse laws. So it is something, obviously, that's very, very legal. Really tricky for us as advisors, because as an advisor, somebody new comes to us and we're going to be doing something for a couple and we're speaking to one person, which naturally quite happens. And then we're saying, well, we need to speak with them as well, because we need their name, we need their number, their email to be able to do the application forms. And the person's like, no, I don't want that. And it starts to feel a little bit uncertain. Now, the problem is, and that we have with that, is that if you are in that situation and it is an issue of potentially economic or domestic abuse, because you're doing a good job and you're insisting on having this information, you will probably find that the abuser will just stop contact, and that they'll just use someone else. They'll just be like, hang on a minute, they'll be thinking this person's getting wise to this. And we obviously want to at that point, there's not much we can do. But we might see it emerging for our clients as well, which is really hard. Depending upon the clients that you have, if you are a mortgage or protection advisor, you probably speak to many, many people. So, and you might have some quite close connections with some, but you speak to so many, you probably won't have close connections with everybody. So it might be in some ways easier to spot it because you've not got that emotional connection, but in some ways it could be harder because you don't know them. But if you are an IFA and you've got not a handful of families, I'm certainly not saying a handful, but if you've got a set number of families, you know them really, really well. And again, it might be easier because you might be able to spot it, but then also you might have that long-term connection where actually it's really, really hard to kind of think, hang on, this person I know is maybe doing that. So you just really want to make sure that you are speaking to all parties involved. Say make sure you get their number, their email address, so that you can speak to them as well. And there are times when it can be really difficult to do that. It might be that somebody works shift worker. It might be that somebody's abroad quite a bit, or it might be that somebody, I don't know, maybe somebody's had a medical condition, which means it's not easy for them to communicate. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't insure them, but it could make it quite hard. But then we're potentially going into things like powers of attorney and stuff like that, which is definitely not for the last 6 minutes of this. But what I would say is that if you do think that you are witnessing any kind of abuse or anything like that, there are really specific places that you can go. There are some brilliant advisors who do specific training on this. You also have a charity which is known as a C charity, which is Surviving Economic Abuse. They do provide training. They do provide lots of outlets. They are people that you can contact and say, look, this is a situation that I'm aware of. What is the next step? And it's just making sure that you're really, really on top of that as well. So hopefully that's been useful from quite a few different areas. Lee, that's probably me doing the main bits. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or any questions that you have for me.
Yeah, sure. And of course, please do come up with your own questions too, if you've got any to ask Catherine while we've got her online. So I've got a couple. One is a kind of practical question more than anything. We've got some male advisors on, which is always brilliant to see. Great to see you guys. This kind of discussion, particularly around women's protection, it can get into quite sensitive matters, quite sensitive medical matters that we males are not as tuned into as perhaps we should be. Have you got any practical tips on how you might deal with that if you were looking at it from a male advisor's point of view?
It's a tricky one. So I'll probably say, what I would say, what Alan would do. So Alan's my co-director and husband. And what we would do. So, I mean, in terms of the things that can be really, really intense is, we've certainly experienced it, so it can be people who maybe experience recurrent miscarriages. It can be, there are people obviously who have been victims of assault. And, again, that can be either gender, but it is something we see quite a lot with women that then develops into PTSD and things like that. And I think, as with anything, it's to make sure that, but that you're just being very human about it, that you're just being a nice person. When, in terms of, if somebody has experienced PTSD due to an assault, we don't need to talk about the assault, and we can try and keep it as minimal as possible and just say, right, okay, you thank them for being open. That's a really important thing. Thank you for trusting me with this information. Thank you for being, open with me. We don't need to talk about that, in a sense. We don't need to go into that. I do need to ask some mental health questions. We would be asking this of anybody, especially anybody with PTSD. Do you mind just if I ask you some specifics? And you will find that you'll either get somebody who's really kind of this date and yes, no, but a lot of the time you will get people who talk quite a bit. So what I always say as well is, and it is hard, is it's really important for advisors that you have some kind of outlet yourself. So if you do speak to somebody about these sensitive situations, I mean, if it's endometriosis, if it's PCOS, things like that, menopause, they are part and parcel of, you know, people's lives. They're a medical condition. Just because they happen to be a female condition and we're talking in a sense about those organs, they're not going to be talking to you about the vagina and things like that. You know, it's not going to happen. They're going to be talking about the actual medical terms and what they're going through. So treat it like you would do any other condition, but with some of the things that can be more emotive, potentially triggering for yourself, just make sure that I say speak to them like you would do a close friend. If someone was trying to say this to you, let them talk, let them say, but then make sure that you've got that opportunity to confidentially and anonymously with somebody say, wow, that was intense. You know, it is really, really intense sometimes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Catherine. That was great. Simon has raised his hand. Hi, Simon. Nice to see you.
Hi, Simon.
Thank you. Hey, yeah, Catherine, thank you so much. These are absolutely brilliant sessions. So thank you for giving us your time. What you just said in terms of Lee's question is phenomenal. So thank you for kind of helping steer that as well. I think I've got two questions. I think. So my first one is about, you were talking earlier on about the additional benefits that people can get through the process. And then does that have an impact on the insurance thereafter? That kind of feels like it feels like it could be quite a worrying thing. What options, like how far are the industry in down the road of fixing that and kind of being wise to that from your perspective?
I think it's very much in its infancy. It's one of those things that it's probably about half a year ago. I just suddenly sat there and myself and just thought, hang on a minute, talking therapy, you know, because obviously chatting to insurers about IP for people, especially a lot of young people, do quite a bit of talking therapy because they're so, you know, there's quite a lot where they're sort of like, well, I go to the gym for my body, but I'm also going to do this for my mind, which is brilliant. And it's so good that young people are doing that, but they're getting penalized for it. That's the word I've been thinking of all this time. I've been trying really hard on the last 45 minutes to think of the word, but yeah, about being penalized for it. And it was something that I've said to the insurers, and to be honest, I think at the moment a lot of them have just gone kind of like, not now, Catherine, not another thing. And I'm just like, yeah, we need to do this. And we need to talk about it because ultimately, you know, we are offering something brilliant. And I'm so sorry for my dog barking. That's why I kind of came forward before because I couldn't hear because he was having a moment. But yeah, we're giving mental health support, which is generally fantastic. I am cautious of mental health support because I'm aware of very specific situations where it was an incredibly negative experience for a few people. And I'm feeding that back to the industry as well. As the mental health support services that you get are generally mild things. If it's anything more than mild, if you've got any kind of like mental health condition like bipolar, schizophrenia, you know, anything like that, they just will not offer support. And it's not clear. And yeah, the processes aren't great, but you know, there is definitely, I personally feel, so obviously this is my opinion, I feel that there is a significant issue coming up, not probably too far in the future, in the sense of we're giving people this brilliant benefit, but that means that we're penalizing them. So why, you know, we shouldn't actively encourage people to seek, we should actively encourage people to get mental health support. So I want to make sure I'm very clear on that, but we shouldn't actively encourage them to seek the mental health support if that in turn means that they're going to have mental health exclusions on their income protection. And they've not figured out how, at the moment, nobody's been clear to me as to how they would address that.
Yeah, and I guess that, like, how does that fit into terms of like human rights and, you know, like in disclosure and, you know, confidentiality? And because I get we need to disclose medical records, but that from an insurance point of view, that does that cross boundaries there? Anyway, yeah, okay, great. So we're moving down that route, which is actually positive news, although it's clunky for the now.
For the now, it definitely needs looking into a lot.
Okay. The next question was about, I think you were talking about, and forgive me, I'm going to use the wrong words here. You were talking about the genetic testings, I think, and you were saying that you said something about they could go down one sort of testing and then it not be disclosed, and they could be caught under non-disclosure. Is there any flexibility to be naive about it from everyone's perspective? Because with the greatest respect in the world, I'm not a medical.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have any medical. So if we go down a route of submitting something on the application, and we would probably note something as an additional
Yes.
piece of information, but whether we categorize it correctly, is there flexibility from the underwriters to go, okay, get what you said, get what you mean, you've allocated it here, not here, or what's your experience of
It's
that?
tricky, it's tricky, and I think it would come down to individual consideration. Most insurers have like a grey claims committee as well, where a lot of this would be debated. The key thing is just it's saying to people, you know, with the breast cancer, the test that you had done, did they think you have breast cancer? And if the answer is yes, then it wasn't a genetic test. You know, even if they say to you, well, it was a genetic test, then you have to be like, okay, however, I appreciate, you know, you saying it's a genetic test, but you've said that they thought you potentially had breast cancer. Because the thing is, they might think that they potentially have breast cancer. If they had the investigations done and it was all clear, then that's not going to be an issue. So, you know, there's no hardship in saying we have had checks done, because that is a positive to get checks done. It was all done clear and there won't be an issue with it. But it's more sort of like from your wording, but it does come down to the questions and how you do it. So like for myself, when we do it at Cura, we pre-underwrite everybody before we start doing our research. So we will go into all of this with people. If you're just doing it from an application form, you're probably not going to see that conversation come up too much, because it'll be right at the start. One thing I didn't mention though about genetic testing is that you can volunteer negative tests. So let's say family member has Huntington's, you've had a genetic test and it's negative, you can volunteer that, and then you can potentially get better terms and better options for the insurances. But in terms of, you know, naivety, I think that would come down to the medical records. For you as an advisor, obviously you need to be on top of it. But let's say someone said, you know, it was just a genetic test, and you've gone, did you have any investigations or anything like that? Well, no, just the genetic test type thing. Claim comes in, and actually this person went for, you know, sort of biopsy of the breast because, you know, there was a bit of a lump there, and then this happened and this happened, and it all came back clear. Even if it had come back clear, that would be seen as a non-disclosure because they went through that process. It wasn't just a blood test to check it. So that's maybe another thing to do as well. Was this just a blood test? Because if not, then that would lean you to think, no, actually, this was more investigation.
Sorry, Lee, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have like a, and maybe this is really cheeky, Catherine, but do you have like a cheat sheet where you've got, like, if this type of question comes up, these are have you got a decision tree question, like the things like that?
We don't have a decision tree thing. I have lots and lots of questions that I have, and that would ask more than what the insurers would ask, so that you can preempt as much as possible. But what I do suggest to people is to set up a G sheet between you and obviously anybody else in your firm. And then in that, in the tab, like the tabs at the bottom, put breast cancer. And then when you do your research, then, you know, each client that comes along, in a sense, you know, breast cancer, right? You know, in the columns, you've got the insurer. What did they indicate? And then, you know, it builds up a repository. It's really easy for you to go to. The insurers do change around a little bit every now and then, but it's not usually phenomenally different. But yeah, there is some, I do training, obviously, in terms of actually doing some medical underwriting and stuff like that, and the questions to be asked, but it's usually quite generic, but there are certain things that you would really need to double check. But generally, what was diagnosed, when was it diagnosed, what treatments have you had, or are you currently having, anything outstanding, and does it affect your ability to work? with some conditions, if it's neurological, it can sometimes be worth asking if there's if it has any influence on the person's ability to drive, if they're allowed to hold a driving license, because that would give you a really good indication as to where that medical condition lies. And also as well as an extra, if somebody is in receipt of PIP, performance independence payment, or employment support allowance, that would generally give you a good indication. I had someone in my team recently say to me, oh, I'm going to do this for this person. You know, they've told me, you know, sort of like, look, it's really mild, their health. And I looked at it and I was like, but they receive, you know, disability benefit. And I'm like, well, yeah. And I was like, then that's not a mild version of that condition. You know, it's incredibly hard to get those benefits. So again, it's being mindful of not just the health side, but sometimes those financial things at either bit, just to give you that better idea.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be helpful.
Right. Is that you, Simon?
It's all done, sir. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the questions as well. So we're sort of coming to the last few minutes. So final questions, please just do raise your hand or come on screen like Simon has. I've got a question, Catherine, which maybe is almost the same, but coming from a slightly different direction. I'm a huge believer in protection, as you know, and signposting and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I'm even presenting at the Protection Distribution Group tomorrow. So my question is, I guess, with the consumer duty overlay, which is now coming into the whole of the retail space, are there any particular things that you might point out to the people who've come on today to think about in terms of signposting, things they really should be considering?
I think in terms of consumer duty, what people really need to be mindful of is that just because you've not been able to arrange protection insurance, or it's maybe taking up too much time, you don't have the insurers all say no, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a no. So there are specialist firms like Cura where we have access to a significant amount of insurers. We have, you know, sometimes some specialist policies with insurers, and people sometimes go, well, how come you get it? It's like, well, actually, there's a little bit of risk for us as advisors with those more specialist policies. So it isn't like we're getting special treatments or anything like that. You know, there are certain things, you know, in certain situations where, you know, we can do a bit more, even with the insurers that other advisors have. And I think, you know, in terms of your consumer duty, if you, I mean, I personally don't understand why we wouldn't look at income protection for the majority of people who are of working age. On the basis, I know there's lots of IFAs that I speak to who say, well, we've got this and that, and we've got this and that, we've got this pension and thing and this investment. It's just like, well, okay, but if the income goes, then all of this beautiful plan is destroyed. And, you know, it's probably a much bigger, if somebody in a sense goes from £10,000 a month take home pay to benefits, the hit on them is going to be far more probably to cope with than somebody who's earning much less. So even to me, I don't really get the argument a lot of the time. Obviously, people could disagree with me about like the more value, you know, somebody has more net worth, someone has that they don't need these things. So our basis is saying, you know, it's a long of when you're looking at things, you know, make sure that you have life, you've got critical illness cover, income protection somewhere in your fact find, and make sure that you're putting in there, well, why haven't I done it? So that's the way that I train my team when they're becoming advisors. Case of like, so why haven't you put on waiver premium? If you've not got an excuse, then you're putting it on. You know, why haven't you done income protection? Because you forgot about it, because the client said, this is another one as well, the client said they didn't want it. It's like, well, doing a quotation is really quite simple with a lot of insurance systems now. So you could just say to somebody, look, I know you're not particularly bothered about income protection, but I have had a look. We could potentially protect this much. I think it's going to cost around this much. Just let me know. It's an extra sentence in your demands and needs report or your recommendation report, suitability letter, whatever you want to call it. And it gives you that tick box for consumer duty to say, I've told them that they can have this and they know the potential pricing. And then also, you know, in terms of the signposting aspects, I have had a look and I can't do it. But I've not then assumed that no one can. So I've spoken to a specialist firm and they've said, you know, they can and can't do this. I spoke to somebody the other day and there was 2 clients that they were chatting to me about. And straight away, they were really, the clients were very, very high risk. And some of it was to do with health. Some of it was lifestyle choices. And it was a case of, no, you've come to me, you've got your consumer duty tick box there. Brilliant, well done. And I'm telling you as a specialist, it's not happening, you know, kind of thing. We can just move on from there in a sense. So it's definitely worth it. And just say, it also means as well, just from a business point of view, I think some people get worried saying, well, will people think that I'm not good enough, you know, that I'm not smart enough, or, you know, I'm not the best that I am. And it's just a case of, I always go to the thing of like, if you go to an accountant and they suggest a lawyer for you, you don't then assume that the accountant's not smart or not good enough. You go, brilliant, thanks, I'll take that lawyer kind of thing. It's the same with this, you know, just like I'm thinking out for pensions, investments, private medical, it's just really important to try and make sure you've got that network of people that you feel really secure with that can give you that honest opinion.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Well, Luke, these hours just fly by, I have to say. So, brilliant. Thank you. I guess we should, unless there's any final questions, any more before we wrap? Nope. So the thanks are coming in. So I think people are getting ready to disengage. So listen, usual thing, we've got another one next month. Thanks everyone for turning up. Thanks for your questions. Always great to see everyone online. Thanks, Catherine. Great session. And we'll see you next month. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.